Have you ever watched those color theory makeup videos where people use highly chromatic colors to create skin tones to make like a foundation? It's basically the same concept, but you're using hair color instead. Generally speaking, you need some sort of balance between all three primary colors, which is red, yellow, and blue, or cyan, magenta, yellow. But doing that, it's not necessarily going to make this center of the wheel here. It's more so probably going to go much darker and more muddy than you're expecting, so you have to create balance in a different kind of way. It's not going to be exact equal parts of each one, but that will just depend on what color you're going for. Not only that, but you also want to add in a lighter color than the plane of value that you are working with. Because this plane of value is smaller than this plane of value, you're going to need a lot more of these lighter tones or your white to create more of this neutral, natural color, or else it's going to go much darker than you're expecting. Because of the fact that this plane of value is much more intensified than this more pastel-y plane of value. Now, a rule of thumb when mixing semi-permanent color is you want to start with your lightest tones first, because there's not as much pigment as your darker tones. So you're going to want to use like a lot more of this and less of this, or else it's going to take over your formulation to where you're going to turn into like a dark muddy color, or it might be unbalanced to where you don't get this like true neutral natural looking color. You might get this like muddy purple color or a muddy orange color, etc. And the colors that you're going to be mixing with your white or your pastel-y colors will depend on what your goal is. So if you're looking for a really cool toned ashy brown color, you might want to use the tiniest bit more blue than the other balancing colors. But if you're going for more of like a red violet or something, you want to use more magenta, pink, or red in this formulation. Does that make sense? Like it honestly just kind of depends. But the biggest takeaway is you want to use way more of this white color than you are of your highly chromatic rainbow colors to create a brown color. Make sense? One thing I forgot to mention about the level system in hair color theory is each level from 1 to 10 has its own like undertone or contributing pigment. So for instance, level 5 is red. So if you use a lot of red in your formula, chances are it's probably going to be around a level 5. So if you use a lot of yellow in your formula, it's probably going to be like a level 9, 10. And if you use orange, it's probably going to be around a level 7, 8, if that makes sense. Don't forget that artificial colors don't reflect light as easily as like your natural melanated hair. So that's why you need to add a lot more white than you think you need, at least to start, because once it's too dark, it's really, really hard to make your formula light again without wasting a ton of color. I also forgot to mention that natural contributing pigment and the level system in hair color theory definitely matters. So looking at these two here, red, like your true primary red that you are used to seeing, does not actually exist on this plane of value. It exists darker. So if you mix a true primary red while you're trying to mix in this plane of value, it's going to go much darker and much more red than you're expecting. So this is a level 5, and then this is probably more like a level 6, 7. I guess all I'm saying is just pay attention to the actual pigments that you use, because each pigment in the 3D color space, they exist at different planes of value. So just make sure to pay attention to the colors that you're actually putting in your formula, because if you are starting with your lightest color, you want to use less and less pigment the darker the pigments that you put in. Does that make sense?